Hello everyone, so the assignment you're going to do for your second asynchronous period during week 3, or for homework if you would choose, is how to analyze and graph your data. So you have your data, now you have to create some kind of table or graph to analyze it. Part 2 is what we will do in our synchronous session, which is basically creating a hypothesis. I thought it was better to have that part when I give you your actual condition that you're going to analyze. Okay, so in every graph, all right, there are 4 parts that I'm looking for whenever I'm grading your graph. So you get about 4 points. Sometimes you might get 5 points depending on the complexity of the graph. So if there's a lot of data sets or there's something in particular I'm looking for, I might give you 5 points. But there are 4 that you can always count on. So first, please make sure you have a title. This is the most important thing. This is what tells us what your graph is going to be about. Okay? You will not believe the number of times students have forgotten to just put a title on a graph. It's an easy 1 point. Okay? You also get a point for labeling the y and labeling the x-axis together. Okay? So the y is obviously the vertical axis and the x is the horizontal. So please make sure you label that. That's the other point. Okay? You will get a point for your data, so graphing your data. In some cases, I might give you 2 points depending on how many data sets you have. And finally, you get another point for a legend. Okay, so some way for me to tell all of the different data sets you have. So here you can see this is data set 3, data set 2, blue is in data set 1. So all together, this is where your 4 points are going to come from. The title, the axes, graphing the data, and then finally the legend. Okay, now let's talk about how to analyze your data. So this is a really easy strategy that I would use. And honestly, sometimes you're going to run into graphs that you just have no idea how to analyze them. Okay, so I would just use this strategy whenever you run into a graph that you're just not sure of. Be able to identify the highest point in your data, be able to identify the lowest point, be able to identify the anomaly or the outlier, and finally tell me what is the larger pattern of the data. So this one you might want to have as a 1 or 2 sentence statement. Okay? So this is one that I would, reserve for the end. Okay, so let's take a look at this in action. All right, so first part H, the high point, that stands for usually the highest y value in your data set. So I just picked y because of the graph and the axes. All right, so we are going to take a look at the gray whale migration from 2010. Okay, so this, I believe, is in LA, as it says up here in the title. On the y-axis, you see the number of whales per week, and on the x-axis, you're just going to see each of the weeks starting from February up to May. Okay, so what is the highest point? You might want to pause this video and go ahead and write down what the highest point is. Okay, so the highest point you can very easily see is 74 gray whales that migrated during this week. So from March 15th to the 21st. Okay, so that's the highest point. The next highest point would be over here in the first week of March. Okay, so that's the highest point. All right, so once you've identified the highest point, it's time for you to identify the opposite, the lowest y value in your data set, which is the L. Okay, So if we look again at this graph, we now have to try and figure out what is the lowest point. So go ahead and pause this video and try to figure out what the lowest point is. Okay, so if you put that the lowest point was the 10th of May to the 15th of May, where only 3 whales migrated, you are correct. Okay, some other lows that we can see is the week before, and then all the way here at the beginning. All right. This is the next part that sometimes it's interesting because I think students really find this tricky, but also in some ways, a math teacher told me it's like the easy one to find because your mind always is looking for a pattern in numbers. So in some ways, when you find the outlier, it confirms that you have a pattern because this is what goes against the pattern. So I always thought that's a really cool way of looking at it. But basically, you want to think about, and this is helping you think about the pattern, what is maybe going against the pattern? Okay, so back in our graph, looking at it here, we notice that, it probably starts out very low in February and it tapers off in May. And it seems like the majority of whales, right, are coming in like this area, this month of March. All right, but let's look at like what is something that maybe goes against this pattern that we're establishing of not that many whales in February and they kind of decrease in April and May. So what is something that goes against this pattern? Go ahead and pause and think about some of the anomalies that you notice. Okay, so there's a couple anomalies you can think about. So this is one that's open to interpretation. I'm going to put a box around the anomalies. Okay, so the boxes that I've put, and we can talk about this one first over here, is there's a slight dip. Okay, so there's a slight dip here before you have this really big increase. So you had a decrease in the number of whales in March 8th, which is a little less than maybe we'd expect. Then over here, you had this really dramatic increase, okay, where it kind of doubled. So you doubled in 1 week. Okay, and then you see this downward trend. So similarly, you could say, okay, there's maybe like a really big decline. So you halved also in a week. And then if we look at number 26 right here, you had a slight increase in April 12th. Okay. So those are all different types of anomalies that we can think about. All right. The last thing you're going to do is then establish a pattern. Okay, so the pattern, you basically can do it for the entire graph. I think that's best, but you can also just do it for a particular region that shows, different x values have the same relationship with the y value. So this is really similar to math where you're looking for increases. So this is what we call a linear relationship. So this is like an increase that's linear. Also, you could have a decrease that's linear as well. Okay. You could have a curve for increasing up or down. So there's lots of like common patterns, and this is where, again, having some knowledge from math helps a lot. Okay, so if we go back at our graph and we look here, let's think about some patterns. So I'm going to give you a moment. Please go ahead, pause the video while you look at some of the patterns and try to figure out patterns you notice. Okay, so if we look at the overall pattern of this, and I had to maybe just draw something to represent, it's kind of like a curve that increases and then decreases. So a pattern we could notice is that whale migration is highest in March. Okay? So whales are not really migrating here in February, and it decreases towards the end of March. Okay? So that's a pattern, you could say. So you have um, low migration levels in February and after March. Okay? There's lots of different patterns too that you could establish. You could talk about how it's increasing as the month of February goes um, into March, and then how it decreases once you're past this particular week right here. Okay? So there's lots of patterns you can talk about. It's really important to also think about what's the difference between a pattern and a trend. So a trend is typically a pattern that occurs over many data sets or a long period of time. Okay, so that's a trend. A pattern is small, it might just be in one little data set or for a short amount of time. Okay, so that's the difference. Trends are long term and patterns are short term or just in one data set. So let's look at the difference by using this example here. Okay, so we have a student named Polly, and this was back in the day when you could walk into your classroom. Now Polly's maybe late for logging into her Zoom call. So let's say Polly has just been arriving really late this past week into her Zoom call. Maybe her alarm is not being set on time. Okay, so that's a pattern, and maybe as her teacher, I will probably want to mention something at the very end and say, hey, you need to show up to class on time. But if I'm noticing that actually for the entire semester she's always running late into her first block Zoom call, that is now a trend. Okay, so it's a trend. It's not a pattern because it is a really long term set of data that we have versus like a short term set of data. So that is it that I have for you on the HLAP explanation. Now I'm going to go over your assignment. Okay, so now it's your turn to start practicing graphing. What you're going to do is you're going to go to this website, okay? And this website actually has a lot of data on different coastal temperatures, okay? So if we go back to the instructions, you need to pick 5 locations. All right, here's what I would do first. I would probably just have a Google Doc. So go to Google Sheets, okay? And the instruction tells you to basically label this as ocean temperatures in California, and you want to put your first and last name. So you can go ahead, take that, copy, paste, go ahead and paste it into this sheet. All right, and then you can go ahead and change this to your own first and last name. Okay, so the next thing you're going to want to do is find your 5 locations and create a table for your data. Okay, so I'm only going to do this with 2 locations just so it's clear. All right, we're going to start here at Morro Bay. I'm going to go ahead and put that. Now you can organize your data however you'd like. I think the easiest thing is to just do this location, and then you can put monthly temperatures. All right, so we're going to do, they start off in September and they go into October, November. These are the only ones that we are going to do for this example. You should do it for all of them. Please just do it for one, like in 1 month. Okay, between these, you can just pick the earlier date. So with Morro Bay, we're going to pick 58. These are in Fahrenheit. Okay, so you may want to clarify that. And then we're going to do this one here. And then one more right here. Okay. So I lied. I'm actually just going to do one of these. You can pick the other 4. Pick 4 more. Okay. Now you need to create a graph. So this is what you'll do. When you've got your entire area, you're going to highlight it. Right now, we've only got one piece of data. So you're going to go ahead, go to Insert, and scroll down on the drop-down menu and click Chart. Okay. Will take a moment to pop up, and now you can go ahead and start to change your data as you'd like. So best thing to do is always have it in a line graph. Okay, so now you're going to have to start playing around with the data. The best thing to probably have is the temperatures here and then the locations on this side. So actually for this, I'm going to go back and put another one of these. So let's pick Monterey. I think that might make it a little easier for you guys to see. Okay. All right, and you're able to see this. Now, if we go back to the chart, you can always double click to change things. Okay, please make sure that you are also writing in the labels. Okay, so if we go to customize for the chart title, you're going to want to put in the title. Okay, put an appropriate one. So ocean temperatures. Okay, so put an appropriate title. Ocean temperatures. You can also switch this for the horizontal. So California locations. Okay. You can also play around with the series. So for the setup, maybe you want to switch them. Okay. Maybe you think it's better to actually do a column and have everybody in a different month. Or sorry, do the bar. Okay. If you want to change the title, you can do that. So go ahead and play around with it. And then the last thing that you are going to do is actually do an HLAP for this. So you might have the ability to make a comment. Judging from how much trouble people had before, like you can make a comment right here, you may just want to open up another doc and do an HLAP in the doc. Okay, so you can say HLAP on ocean temperatures in California. Identify what's the highest point. So maybe the highest point was in Monterey in September. So you'd write that down. Lowest point was in November in Morro Bay. Okay. And then talk about the anomaly in the pattern. So even though it's difficult to see it here, it stays fairly stable. You can see a slight decrease. So that would be a good pattern to talk about. We don't have enough temperatures or locations on here to really discuss something beyond like that. So you will have to think and look at your data more to do this part. But I hope that helps. And if you still have questions, please let me know. Okay, take care.